For a handful of teams, the 2023 NBA draft felt like an all-or-nothing proposition. Get the first pick or stare into the abyss. A kind of Powerball jackpot where the victor would land a generationally special talent named, well, Victor. For everyone else, the draft became a process of measuring the consolation prizes, of which there were many. With the second pick, Charlotte decided to take Brandon Miller, the lanky, long-range launcher from Alabama, and the next player off the board was a bouncy, brawny, and ballsy guard.
First name
Sterling.
Last name
Henderson.
Better known to his friends as
Scoot.
Who knows if they meant to do it, but the Henderson family parents really nailed the name thing here. Aside from looking stately on a business card, Sterling can be defined as excellence, and Scoot means to swiftly dart.
Impressive. Very nice.
Their son grew up swiftly darting with excellence in Marietta, Georgia, as the second youngest of 7 in a tightly knit basketball family. Henderson was originally a member of the 2021 high school class before he jumped a grade to graduate early and forego the final season of his high school career to sign a fat contract with Puma, been loving their hoop shoes lately, and for 500,000 big ones with the developmentally focused G League Ignite at only 17 years old. Now that the board is finally set, we're still left with a number of pressing questions. Just how legitimate is Scoot's superstar ambition? Were the nattering national media right about this dude's talent, or is he simply another athletic point guard with a dad who looks like a celebrity? Will he have what it takes to challenge the legacy of Scoot McNairy?
Let's hit it.
Let's start by stating the extremely obvious. Scoot Henderson is a special athlete. The type of person whose physical gifts likely had a Rand McNally's worth of athletic paths available to him. Growing up, he spent a lot of time playing football at a variety of positions, which is not difficult to imagine. His listed height is 6'2", which on its own won't be blowing anyone's hair back. Past that ordinary start, every subsequent trait is remarkable. Let's start with his arms and his hands. As is often the case with tippy-top picks, we don't have official measurements, but you need only your eyes to see that he is exceptional in both areas. I've seen his wingspan listed at roughly 6'9", and based on what I've seen, this seems credible. Watch him jump straight up and block this layup attempt without making body contact with the driver, or watch him nonchalantly win this jump ball against a player who is 7 inches taller than him. It's an enormous equalizer for a player that size. But he also has big, vice-grip strong hands that can effortlessly palm and extend the ball away from defenders to do things like create passing angles, snatch 50-50 balls out of dense traffic, or this ridiculousness. It wouldn't shock me if his hands were in the neighborhood of 9.5 inches wide. In motion, the effectiveness of those traits is enhanced by the fact that
he is strong like bull and
he's really fast.
These traits don't guarantee anything, but for a smaller player to survive in the increasingly spaced-out NBA, a +7 wingspan is a valuable tool that impacts nearly everything. Especially helpful when you factor in that Scoot is vertically and horizontally explosive. Getting off the ground, it's hard to put a number on it, but it's significant. I'm often impressed by the speed of his jumps without needing much of a load up at all. When ground bound with the ball in his hands, he's very flexible and able to get low to the ground with the ball while unleashing some truly violent dribble change of direction to create separation. He hits gaps like the Kool-Aid Man. And there are lots of terrific athletes out there, but to me, Scoot's most important trait is that he seems to have an advanced steadiness and sense for how to use his gears for a guard of this classification. He can be blistering in the open court, sometimes casually traveling from baseline to baseline in 4 dribbles while punching through clusters of defenders aiming to wall him up. And yet, he can also be methodical and patient with how he attacks a defense, stringing together sequences of hesitation, powerful change of direction, and sheer speed. Putting all of those things together, at times his ability to maintain his balance in chaotic scrums is baffling, almost like an action hero inexplicably running on a high-speed train. Watch OKC Blues Adam Makoka try and fend him off as an offensive rebounder as he wrangles the ball with one hand, breaks hard, gathers himself before immediately flattening out and accelerating in the opposite direction where notorious charge taker Jalen Williams is waiting for him at the restricted area. Scoot then slithers around the set defender to explode and extend with his right hand to finish softly off the glass. Purely from the physical standpoint, his measurements and athletic profile line up with players like Donovan Mitchell, Eric Bledsoe, or even reaching back to the blistering power guards of the early 2000s like Baron Davis or the earlier versions of Steve Francis. He's going to enter the league and immediately be on the short list of most athletic players at his position. Henderson thinks of himself as someone who can score at all three levels, and in the general sense, I think he's right about that. He definitely can. The question for his trajectory will be how likely he is to become an elite scorer from any particular area. Scoot's touch is a layered discussion. He displays it in many situations. His overhanded touch in the lane on runners is promising, but I wouldn't say that he's ever struck me as a natural shot maker or someone who projects to be a multi-purpose tool with a dynamic shot pocket beyond the three-point line. Scoot was streaky from three for much of this past season, with a brutal stretch at the end of the year where he missed 18 of his final 25 attempts. Mechanically, I'd say Scoot has something like a 1.3 or a 1.4 motion jumper, and broadly speaking, there's not a ton to heavily nitpick. His right arm does lean at an angle across his face, and I do wonder how much this affects the arc of his shot and how his ball approaches the rim. As he transitioned into more of an on-ball diet this past season, his catch-and-shoot percentage did improve, albeit on a smaller sample. Last season, he hit on 17.1% of his 35 attempts, and that number jumped to 41.7% this past year. The question is how much he can improve when he's on the move. Even going and watching Scoot shoot the ball at 15 or 16 years old, something that you absolutely should do if you're a dork with nothing to do because his speed and power turned high school games into absolute hilarious carnage, his load up and energy transfer didn't fill you with the dread that nuclear athlete point guards often do. He shot a fairly effortless and comfortable ball off the dribble, and it frequently looked reasonably good. It's just that the results have never crossed that threshold into above average efficiency. And in the past few years, he spent a lot of time trying to sharpen this part of his game. He's even talked about working with Chuck Person at times, aka the Rifleman. Ever heard of him? His dribble to shoot motion is very comfortable moving to his left, although directionally it was his least efficient this past season. He went 8 for 27, which comes out to 29.6%. Dribble pull-up shooting is a key detail for initiators these days, because unless a player is one of the elite downhill maniacs, heavy usage handlers need to at least create anxiety in the minds of opposing defenses. Otherwise, it creates a lack of respect, and that can penalize everyone else on the floor and lead to stagnation.
And you know how much God hates that.
However, in a wide variety of situations, Henderson's strong preference off the dribble is to finesse his way into his pull-up game, which primarily takes place in the mid-range.
Show me the operating area. Where you like
my
to be at?
spots. They right here.
They're right here.
He ain't lying. Of the 130 dribble jumpers that he took during the regular season of his second G League year, 93 of them were twos, and 84 of those were at the elbows and just inside the top of the arc. As the circumstances varied, so did the results. In and of itself, preferring to score in these spaces isn't definitively a bad thing, but it is a tough racket. Chris Paul, as we know, has made more than a living operating in those austere and lonely offices, but it's a job description that very few players can become efficient enough at to even justify it being the primary focus of what they do. Over the past 5 NBA seasons, the 10 most prolific elbow foul line scorers per 100 possessions have hovered in the 44% and up range. Spare one strong-willed exception. Nearly all of those players reach a point of impeccable footwork and controlled drift in their lower bodies. Scoot gashes the first line of defense here and has the help defenders hugging the paint to support their dropping big. And if Scoot makes one more downhill motion, he can get the entire defense on the hook and reel them in. Instead, the result is a drifting pull-up that misses long and Santa Cruz recovers it. End of shot clock, end of quarter, end of game. You need a bucket? I'm for it. I'm just unsure about it being the full-time mode of thinking. More on that later. When it comes to rim pressure, the Marietta Mauler is a force, and he clearly made it a priority to attack the basket more in year 2. There are times when he could make more of an effort to create contact early with rim protectors instead of working around them, but even still, he converted on 58.1% of his 124 attempts at the rim. One noticeable issue at this point is that Scoot does seem to prefer his right hand quite a bit, as he frequently angles for harder right-handed shots on that side, and when he's working his way to the right side of the rim, he's able to maintain long, balanced strides and either explode or decelerate as needed to create his angle. He's much more comfortable extending and evading defenders with his right hand, whereas on the left side, he clearly still has touch, but he has to steady his weaker hand if there's contact. All in all, I think you have to come away thinking that these results were encouraging, especially when you consider his size, his age, and the fact that his issues are pretty fixable. Scoot's second Ignite season has drawn some murmuring criticism, with accusations that he coasted or bided his time. To me, this is twofold and requires a closer look at both sides of the ball. On offense, I have had moments where I've wondered, is Scoot being aggressive enough and bending the defense? Shouldn't he be flipping that into opportunities for his teammates? It's really important to note that Scoot went into this season with the intention of growing as a thinker of the game. Last season, in what would have been his senior year of high school, he was a supporting character to the side of the frame next to talented perimeter players like Dyson Daniels, Marjon Beauchamp, and Jaden Hardy. That allowed him to play free as a bird, able to freelance and unleash his athleticism off the catch. This current season was a shift towards being the focal point of his team's attack.
Yeah, well, year one, Scoot was just go play free. If you make a mistake, fine. Just play through them, have fun. Year two, Scoot, the whole league adjusted to him. So now he's in the scouting report, and their game plan is to stop him. So I think year one was physical, year two is mental.
We talked about how Scoot is inclined to score the ball, but at the same time, he's by and large a conscientious and willing playmaker who's eager to keep everyone involved. I find Scoot to be a unique developmental case among lead guards. Very frequently, overwhelming athletic scorers who grow up with the ball in their hands have to go through a process of slowing down. Frequently playing off the ball and against older players might at least partly be why Scoot is so ahead of schedule in this sense. He's not an especially manipulative passer at this point, but he deserves credit for keeping the simple things simple. As a starting point, Scoot's presence creates some simple opportunities that can be seized. His crazy transition speed draws eyeballs and collapses scrambling defenses, which leads to dump-offs and lasers out to the three-point line. But in terms of half-court reads, I think he's growing. In empty side actions like this one, where the decision-making is a bit clearer, he's more than capable of making roller passes when the screen defender commits to him, and he frequently finds these pocket passes. But the better the screener defender happens to be at positionally wagering between Scoot and his roll man, the more erratic he seems to get. Not unusual for a 19-year-old. If the defender overcommits early and the weak side help is forced to follow suit, he will often see it quickly and make the pass. If we're talking about technique, he's solid, but I do think that he's a notch below some of the talented and exciting playmakers who have entered the league in the past few years. Trae Young, Luka Doncic, Tyrese Halliburton, LaMelo Ball. Each of these players have a number of things in common, but for this discussion, I want to focus on three. I'm folding some things together here, but the first is a sense for touch, velocity, and overall placement of the basketball. He'll often have the right idea of where a ball should go, but misfire in odd ways by either putting the ball wildly off the mark or deliver it with way too much tangy zip. In general, Scoot was not a reckless pilot of the offense this past season. His assist-to-usage rate was 1.11, which means he tended to make good decisions, and he posted 164 assists with only 82 turnovers. But a majority of these turnovers were misplaced passes. The second is an ability to blur the lines between having an agenda as a scorer and punishing rotation as a playmaker. And from where I'm sitting, these two instincts within Scoot's game are reaching towards one another, waiting to fully connect. A couple of recurring sequences show up on film. The first is when he's on the right side of the lane, driving towards the basket, and he decides to pass the ball back to the top of the key, either to a spot-up shooter or a popping screener. And the other is when he drives the ball all the way to the baseline, which happens all the time, and he either misjudges how much help is coming, or he just gets himself caught in the air with nowhere to go. This is why I mentioned earlier that I'm eyeballing the role of his middle game so intently. I'm an admitted zealot for the floater, not only because I think they tend to be softer, more reboundable shots, and Scoot has shown that he can hit them, but also because for a smaller player, that forward motion can engage the low defender and be blended with a passing motion. A pull-up jumper, again at that size, is a shot taken with upright posture and neutral momentum. And for a player who's changing their mind at the last moment at 6'2", occasionally you'll get the baseline cutter, but otherwise that's a difficult sightline to the perimeter. On defense, it's far less, defensible. Scoot's level of competitiveness seemed to vary wildly based on who or what was in front of him. There were the matchups like the one he had with Rawle Alkins, where something got into him and he decided to eradicate Alkins on that side of the ball. And there are the matchups like the one he had with David Stockton, where he gave the least amount of respect possible. There were, however, frequent positive signs that he was thinking about the action. It's just that throughout the games I watched, Scoot was prone to lazy closeouts. He had a habit of having his hands down at the point of attack, track, offering very little resistance to drivers, or just flat out losing his man for no reason. The reality is that Scoot is capable of being an exceptional defender. He has the lateral mobility and the core strength to wall up, funnel, or even repel drivers when he's interested, and his recovery speed projects ideally to be an off-ball terror. He has the length and strength in his forearms, wrists, and hands to disrupt and recover 50-50 balls. 1 through 3 switchability seems possible for him, if only in short spurts. But you gotta ask yourself this question. How many all-defense level players in the NBA flipped the switch of consistent effort after they got to the league? Half-hearted defenders can turn things around. It's just that top-tier defenders typically carry that drive with them wherever they go, no matter the setting. In taking Scoot, I think it's safe to say that Portland, as a franchise, has slowly accepted that they're closer to square one than to a path that goes to the top of the mountain. His presence implies that a real season of change is probably coming. Scoot has expressed his affection for Damian Lillard, but even if they share the floor together at all, the overlap probably won't be significant. And on paper, the idea of adding a splash of Scoot to the youth movement of Shaedon Sharpe, the sweet-shooting, powerful, and explosive wing, and Anthony Simons, the cat-quick shot creator entering the 6th year of his career, is a recipe for league pass euphoria. Scoot is deferring enough to feed into the developmental bend of those two players. It'd undoubtedly be a blast, but there is a difference between something working and something excelling. Because of the size of that trio, it's basically mandated that they find a significant upgrade in terms of rim protection and something resembling a total reset for the rest of the roster, which I have to assume the Portland front office saw coming anyway. It's inarguable that Scoot Henderson's literal path to the NBA has been unique. In some ways, he's been marketed as an NBA player for over a year while being forced to sit at the kids' table. That's happening in part because I think his developmental path is unusual too. Specifically at this age, we don't see a ton of scoring-minded players that are this athletic with this self-awareness to begin rounding out the other major parts of their game. That uniqueness is driven by his mindset, which is the swing variable that eased some of my concerns about his future. Scoot, the person, is a self-proclaimed introvert who is learning to speak up and learning to slow the game down. When I listen to him talk, I hear someone who is consumed with getting better, a borderline obsessive worker. Furthermore, and I think most importantly, this is not a player who is coming into the league with self-sabotaging agendas that have derailed and deluded some who have come before him. He seems keenly aware of that and intent on staying the course. In that sense, my confidence in him has really grown.
I mean, I got 5 older siblings, so it's just growing up around them and, seeing their peers, just they wouldn't work out sometimes, and I would see the outcome. So
Scoot continues to be studious about bridging the ever-shrinking divide between his comfort scoring the ball and his eagerness and technique and fluidly getting off the ball. If he improves as a movement shooter and if he commits himself to consistently competing on both sides of the floor, he could become an all-NBA player. It would not shock me at all if by his 24th birthday he's already averaging 25-plus points per game, 8 or more assists, and shooting over 35% from 3. But will that be the kind of role that best serves him? My feeling is that the winningest version of Scoot Henderson will be someone who toggles between high offensive output when it's needed and a supportive utility star. A player who proves himself invaluable with the range of things that he can do that bolster a championship-level primary option. Because of his work ethic, because of the variety of ways that he can impact a team, I think Scoot Henderson is a malleable tool and the type of culture catalyst that could lead the next decade of Portland basketball. Even with my concerns, the floor is high. He projects as someone who will widen their options instead of narrowing them. Those are qualities that were worth betting on, and that bet could pay off big for the Trailblazers. Let me know if you agree.